Welcome to Business Unveiled Podcast. This is the place where we help overwhelmed, time-starved entrepreneurs like you make the profitable shifts to get more done and get more out of life. I'm your host, Angela Profit, award-winning 8-figure entrepreneur and CEO. And in every episode of Business Unveiled, I'm bringing you conversations that will give you the expertise and strategies that will scale your team and business so you can get shit done. That's GSD in our world. So get your time back and grow a business that helps you be present in your life. Let's do this, y'all. It's Angela. I'm back for another episode of Business Unveiled. I'm so excited for our guest today. We are going to be chatting about one of my very, very, very favorite things because we don't talk about it enough. Like we are talking about it more and more. And we were just chatting about just cultural upbringing and how for some reason, for so long, women are afraid or scared to talk about money and make money. And the way I look at it is the more money you make and the more money you have, the more people you can actually help and impact. So reframing a little bit differently is what we're going to talk about today. So Whitney, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on.
Yay! Before we hop in and start talking about all the goods, share with us a little bit about your cultural upbringing and how have you gotten to where you are today?
Yeah. So my upbringing, honestly, I was raised by a single father that was an entrepreneur. His dad and his grandfather before him were entrepreneurs. And I really was kind of exposed early on to, my dad being self-employed and working for himself. I think starting out when I was a little girl, only had a couple retail stores and then expanded that into about 16 stores throughout my life. And so he not only had, he wasn't only in self-employed, but he had employees. And so a lot of this, I was really opened up to this idea, especially early on, about creating a life for yourself and also the responsibility that comes with business and the responsibility of taking care of other people. And I remember, especially being like a little girl, how much I just looked up to him and how much he had really worked hard to give us this really special life, especially just me, just being me and him. And so that was something when, I got my first taste of entrepreneurship very early, and I had a lot of respect for it. And I had a lot of, admiration, not just for the glorification of it, of, making your own money and being able to do whatever you want and having the kind of freedom and responsibility that comes with it. But, also kind of this really early on ability to see that, other people's lives were also impacted by what he had built. And for me, that was something that was really admirable and something that I really, really loved, seeing come from my dad.
That's so awesome. I love that. It's like, I learned my dad wasn't an entrepreneur, but his family was. And so kind of like I got to be around that. And so I never saw myself as an entrepreneur though. And then
Sure.
when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, but so much of like the values and the morals and just like the way that we act and how we run things, how we treat people and build community and build team, a lot of that came from my dad too. So that's awesome.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So when it comes to like marketing and branding and money and like how to make money from doing those things, and you talk a lot about like diversifying. And I know that, as an entrepreneur, we get sidetracked sometimes. I know I do. It's like scroll, scroll, scroll. And it's like, income coming from here and income coming from here. And you have this revenue stream here and here and here. And sometimes I look up and I'm like, oh my God, we've got stuff coming from so many different ways. And, my head is spinning. And so, which is sometimes a good problem to have, but it's like, if you take a step back and slow down and create a strategy. But when you talk about like diversifying, how have you done that, like with your company and what you're doing with your clients?
Yeah. So like very early on, I was really obsessed with business. In fact, I was actually simultaneously growing Eckis Marketing when I had just become, I had become a part of this startup. And so I had the startup that I was working through, and then I had Eckis, that the agency that I was also building at the same time. And I had kind of gotten this idea when I had, when as I was growing and scaling the agency and I was hiring team members and I was training them, I started to utilize that startup and treat them almost as like this client. And so I kind of started blurring the lines a little bit and bringing these kind of like, this investment sort of business into my agency work. And so that was kind of when I really started to get interested in like investing in other companies and to be able to take my own money that I was making and, create these different verticals of income and revenue for myself. And the best way that I kind of did this was by really looking at my time and looking at what I was doing and what I was able to do, like in ways of being able to invest myself. So with the startup, obviously it was sweat equity. So it was like me working through it. But one of the things that I started realizing was like, I could be taking this money that I'm making and investing it into different places without, having to expand my time further. And with the launch of Get Supr, this, hemp infused instant coffee, that was exactly kind of what I did is I was able to take this new business and this new product and utilize the business that I had already created and basically have the marketing team build up Get Supr and launch Get Supr. So when I talk about diversifying, especially like when we talk about doing multiple businesses or, becoming a serial entrepreneur, I think it's critical to look at our time management and then also kind of backward engineer the ways that we can contribute or diversify what businesses we have our hands in. I think the biggest thing there, though, is kind of what you mentioned earlier is it's not necessarily saying yes to every opportunity. It's saying yes to the opportunities that are going to benefit us, but that also too, we have that ability to take on. And from there, that's kind of what I've been doing. And I have this dream too, where as we continue to scale and grow, Eckis Marketing, I would love to take on other startups. I would love to personally invest in them and even like, seeing what opportunities we can have to work with ground floor companies and help them through by bringing them the right strategic partners or bringing them the right networks and funds and things of that nature. So for me, that was what I kind of started to do. And it was really, really early on. And even now that, that startup, my time has kind of passed with them, but that's where I kind of got this whole idea of serial entrepreneurship. And it was one of the things too, where I felt like with the agency, I was like, there's no way I can do a side hustle. Like this is my main hustle. And so I had to get creative and I had to look at where I was at in ways that I could utilize bringing in more revenue or creating more income for myself. And that was the way that I did it.
So, how do you grow your team and keep them focused? Because I know sometimes my own team, I'm like, oh my gosh, let's do this and this and this. And they're like, hold your horses. Like, so how do you find the right team members to get them on board with these new startups? Because it's a totally different ball game when you work with a startup versus a product or a company that has been out for a little bit. It's a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to kind of clarify too. So like Eckis doesn't necessarily like our focus isn't startups. Like our focus is very much lifestyle and CPG. And really, I started coming up with this idea more so that, these startups would come in and they'd be treated as like a client. So the girls wouldn't really have any real indication if it was something I was personally invested in or not. I was just treated as a client to them. Yeah. Unless there were other opportunities that were kind of checked at the door for them. And we have had companies kind of offer different things like that, like stock options or whatnot to our team to really give them kind of a piece of the action and get them excited. But more so when we go back to looking at team members, especially for the agency, I think the biggest thing is that I look for people that are excited about what we're doing, more so than really anything, because I think being in an agency requires a little bit of grit. It requires a little bit of tenacity, managing multiple different clients, managing a bunch of different types of personalities, and also being able to show up and be creative, like in your best light. So I look for, the people, and we have an all female team. So I look for the women that come to us that are hungry and that are excited to, be a part of this and to try this out. What I see when I go to hire a team member furthermore is also that I look for their vision of long term. And I think that's one of the main questions I always ask during my hiring process is, what do you see in 5 years? Where are you going to be at? And most of the time, they respond back with something of the nature that's already inside of the agency, or, them kind of building up a longer term career or home within the agency. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer to that.
That's awesome. So how do you, I mean, I'm not going to assume, but I'm kind of assuming that the things that you want to do maybe have like a personal backstory to it. So it's like, was there something that was there a story like with you or your family or friend that it like drove you to really look into like the whole CBD, and how is this helping, from a health benefit, and how, caffeine can be kind of addicting, but it's like, how did you choose this route? Was there some type of a story that was like life-changing for you, and you're like, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a huge story behind Get Supr, and it's a very mission-led brand. And it's been that way because it has to do so much with my own personal story. But I was really, the story kind of goes that I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. After being diagnosed, I had kind of spoken to my family about it, and there had been a lot that came to light that made me realize that there's I'm going to say trigger warning here, but the addiction and suicide that had been a part of our family was also due to mental health and to the lack of education and medication or medical treatment or just talking to someone. My family really didn't have access to a lot of those things. And there wasn't as much awareness or education around what, the importance of mental health, especially with these heavy diagnoses. So with that, I really started to reroute my life. And, this all happened in 2020. So I had been diagnosed. I had lost 75% of my agency business because we were primarily hospitality. And I had come across, basically experimenting with cannabis. I didn't want to go on antidepressants, and I have nothing against them. I think they're incredible and they help people in such a large capacity. For me, there was a history of addiction in our family. So I chose not to, basically not go on them. And with that, I started exploring cannabis, and my biggest thing was onset anxiety triggered from caffeine, and then being able to sleep at night. And so the one thing that I really noticed was working, and that was also my biggest trigger at the same time, was coffee. And so I started adding CBD oil to my coffee every morning. And basically the idea was birthed. And from there, we actually found a way to formulate it that's a more convenient and beneficial way by using water soluble hemp extract powder, which is a broad spectrum CBD. And what it does is basically the CBD slows the release of caffeine. So you get a really calm, focused energy. You don't feel sleepy and you don't feel high. It's essentially non-psychoactive because there's about a 0.0% THC level within it. But you really kind of feel this beautiful, focused, euphoric feeling without feeling sleepy or too calm or kind of like you have a brain fog. So that was also something too, where, again, I've just been diagnosed. Caffeine was a trigger. Everyone was telling me to cut the caffeine. I really didn't want to cut my morning cup of coffee. So then Get Supr was born, and there it was.
I knew that I'm like, normally these types of things come out of like these really personal story. Like, thank you so much for sharing, because I feel like I'm not like a huge I mean, who doesn't love caffeine? It's like when we have to
Yeah.
GST and we have to get shit done, right? And it's like
Mhm.
I have this natural flow of energy. And growing up, my parents were very addicted to their coffee. It's like,
Mhm.
I mean, they would just drink cups throughout the day. And growing up, I just remember, it was almost like, don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't anything before
Mhm.
having my coffee. And I kind of felt that that was like a little bit negative, and in my head, I'm like, I never want to be addicted to something like this, to where it's like, I can't freaking function without, having something. And
Sure.
so, I don't have an addictive personality. And, but I see that a lot. And so I try
Mhm.
not to, it's like, I have to have this or I'm dying. People just need their moods like really.
Yeah.
And I'm like, shit, if I have to have something like that to function, like that's just not
Mhm.
good. Now, ask me about allergy medication, because I'm like, allergy back, I will tell you something very different. I'm like, yes, I'm addicted. If I don't have Zyrtec or, sometimes nose spray, I'm just like, oh my God, am I
Yeah.
not going to be able to breathe, kind of thing. But it does help people get through the day. And then I've watched my mom like get these horrible headaches, like horrible
Mm.
headaches, if you
Mhm.
don't have like that caffeine. And so over the years, as CBD and the hemp and the things have been introduced into various drinks and stuff. I remember recently I was at our co-working space and they had no bottled water. And so the only thing they had was like this grapefruit juice, with CBD or something. And I love
Oh,
water, but I was like, okay,
yeah.
well, it's the only thing. And I am thirsty and, there's not too much sugar in it. And so
Mhm.
I was like, this is actually really good. And there was like this calming
Yeah.
effect. Like it didn't make me tired.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, like I would drink this again. And I'm high
Mhm.
strung as it is. And so sometimes I like need to bring it down. That
Yeah.
it really does help. There's so many factors of positive things that without the addiction and like without the headaches
Sure.
and without the side effects, from CBD. And so
Mhm.
I'm just curious, like, how did you go about finding like the right partners, the right people to manufacture and distribute it? And what was that journey like? Because I know like that's not easy. And
Yeah.
so, it's with your dad being an entrepreneur, sometimes it's like who you're surrounded by and you share your ideas with the right people
Mhm.
and then they're able to get you to the right places. But like, what was that journey like?
Yeah. So it was actually kind of funny enough. So Get Supr was actually acquired by me, but we had reformulated it and rebranded it.
Okay.
So this all happened in a very divinely guided way. I was diagnosed shortly after. I was actually doing a bunch of sales pitches, and I had come across this guy that had formulated a water soluble hemp extract into instant coffee. I had tried the product and was like, this is absolutely genius. This is a great idea. So I had essentially taken it and reformulated all of it. So that original formulation and product that we had acquired was kind of built off a lot of his own contacts. But for example, right now we're actually looking at different manufacturers and we're looking at different production because obviously we want to make this the best product that anyone's tried. And I think, if anything, like the biggest piece of advice I can give is, after meeting with so many different cannabis and CBD companies, is to find people that you really enjoy working with, but also to find people that you really trust. And that was one of the things that I had started noticing, the levels of relationships with different vendors or manufacturers. There were some that I felt so strongly connected to and had so much trust for. And there were a couple other ones that I just really didn't align or click with. And it almost kind of felt like a full body, like, no. And so for us, that was something too, where obviously we're sampling, we're taste testing, we're doing all these different things during our formulation process. But when it came down to finding the right people, it really was like, those that were excited about Get Supr, those that wanted to offer up their feedback and how we can make the product better. It wasn't just a sale. It was more or less of, hey, I really understand and love your mission. And I feel, passionate about offering you, this feedback on how I can make it better. And from there, that's when, I really started to also to fall in love with the formulation process, because there were people out there that wanted to help, and wanted to bring us all these ideas on how to make the product better itself.
And that's like, to me, like that's the most important part, like in the beginning of when you're doing something new, is just getting the feedback and asking, and then actually taking the feedback and, doing something with it. It's just so important. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, I love all this. So going back to like productivity and focus and time management, because I'm like a geek about it. How do you manage like all the different things? And, before we started recording, I'm so interested to know, like, how does it help with focus, and how do you manage, all these different things with your time?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to help me manage everything is obviously by putting people in my weakness spots, honestly. I mean,
Amen.
I honestly feel like that's one thing that as an entrepreneur was such a misconception, especially when I first started, was that I had to be perfect and I had to be the one that was good at everything. And honestly, that's such a lie, and such a lie that we tell ourselves as entrepreneurs. And there are so many people on my team that are so vastly different from me. And there's so many people that are clients or that, help me with my podcast or my support or our strategic partners or vendors or whatever you want to call them, that really have strengths that are my biggest weakness. And so for me, that was one of the biggest things, where especially looking at the agency and then venturing off into Get Supr, was how am I going to manage my time, and who do I need to help me? And honestly, after launching Get Supr, I hired an operation manager and an executive assistant. And then I also hired a personal assistant. And it wasn't because I felt like I needed them. It was more or less because I started realizing I'm not leading my team to success because I'm being pulled in a different direction. And my now schedule is suffering because I don't have someone to help me monitor it. And I'm not able to do this in a perfect way myself. So I'm going to outsource and ask for help here. And those were two major hires that allowed for my agency to scale, and then also allowed for me to really watch my own bandwidth and be able to show up for my clients and my team and Get Supr in my best light. And again, like, we could sit through this and say, you can do everything yourself. You can be gritty, especially in startups, and you can do X, Y, and Z. But I think at, the level that I wanted to be at, I really wanted to make sure that every bit of time that I had with someone sitting in front of me was present, and that I was able to give my full 100% to what I was doing. And I am doing, two things at once here, and I have a lot of help and a lot of support. But I think the biggest thing was really monitoring my own time and my ability to, again, show up in the best light.
It's so, you're like speaking my language. It's like my whole thing is like, don't say yes to something if you're not going to show up and be present. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Like, do you have like personal, like pre-qualifications and professional pre-qualifications of like what you say yes to? Like, are those very, plastered on the wall for your team, or do they come to you weekly and say, okay, here's all the ideas. Do we want to go down this hole or this hole? Like, what does that look like for you and your team?
Yeah, for the agency, like, yes, there are some things that I should back up. Me and the girls have like an open door policy. And that is one of the things that I never want them to feel like they cannot come talk to me. And I'm sure there are times where they probably feel that. I mean, I'm not going to say it's perfect 100% of the time ever, but I feel that there should always be enough time for a team member to come and talk to me or come and ask me a question or ask advice or ask for support or whatever they need to. Now, that being said, client work and daily operations sure should always go through our operational manager. But outside of that, no, there's nothing that I think I'm very intuitively guided. And I feel like I lean into most, what feels like a priority and what doesn't. So, which is probably what's gotten me in trouble in the past by not having those strict boundaries. But I feel like that is something too, where again, Eckis Marketing still has my last name on it. There are
Mhm.
still going to be moments where I'm jumping in on a client call just to listen in, or if a team member needs support, or if the operation manager needs support, it's still my company. I would say, if anything, my time is still 100% a priority to both. And it's more or less just being able to understand that, you know, there's priorities and things that, are consuming my time. If it's a team member, 1000%, they're my highest priority. If it's something, with Get Supr that's an emergency, sure, also 100%. So I think what we see is we try to level out these checks and balances of, ensuring that, again, I have that white space for if anything were to go wrong or someone does need me. But also too, the balances are that, yeah, there's, make sure that, you're running everything through who needs to know it or who's better equipped to answer it. That's the other thing too. I feel like at this point, my clients, I'm like, I don't even involve me in it. You guys honestly have a better finger on the pulse than I do at this point.
We sound so similar, like so similar. I mean, people are like, how do you go and travel and speak all over the world? And how are you comfortable like leaving your company? And I'm like, well, that shit didn't happen overnight. And it's
Yeah.
well over 2 decades. And I have sat through enough workshops and worked with enough coaches and consultants to know that if you can't step out of your business for 30 days and it run, you got a job. You don't have a business. Like,
That's a fair point.
right. I mean, it's
Yeah.
true though. And it's like, in the beginning when I was a newer entrepreneur, it feels good to be needed. But then like once you're in and you're going, and it's like if something happened, to you, and it's like the spoke of the wheel and it's turning, and if something happens to that spoke, everything crumbles, like that's not good. Like that's actually a bad thing. And so for us, it's like in events and hospitality and these luxury weddings, and it's so personal. It's personal money being spent. And so many planners that I do consulting for their company, and they're like, how do you not show up at all your events? And how are you? And it's like, I'm emotionally not attached to these. This is a business. And if you plan ahead and you put the right people in place, you should be able to remove yourself. And the easy part is executing it. That's the easy part. It shouldn't be hard, but we're so emotionally attached to these things, and especially entrepreneurs with like new products. It's like your baby, and like you're emotionally attached to it. If somebody tells you your baby's ugly, it's all in the way that you respond, but it's for the better. It's to help. And so I'm sure that you've taken chances, over the years. And is there something that you took a chance on and you went with your gut reaction, and then you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but you learned something from it? Like, is there one thing that just sticks out in your head?
Yeah, I think there's multiple things that stick out in my head. I think I've honestly, just speaking candidly here, being in a service-based operation and moving into a product-based business has been really interesting, right?
Totally different.
I think that, especially early on, there were moments where I couldn't handle client feedback. I couldn't handle people criticizing my work. And it wasn't, and that took a very long process of me to really kind of shift that mindset of they're not, personally criticizing me. They're criticizing what I'm doing. And it's
Right.
not for any personal reason. It's more or less for them, to be able to receive the product that they want and see it come to life. So I think as I look back, there's moments of that where I took a lot of things personally, and I'm sure I probably jumped the gun on responses and being diplomatic in my responses. Honestly, I'm very transparent in everything that I do. And that also means that my responses are pretty damn transparent as well, especially if something's not driving with me. So I think a lot of my earlier years was also gaining experience on how to work directly with people and how to really approach businesses and clients in the service-based industry where, I'm able to show up for them in a really strong light, but I'm also able to have a lot of confidence in myself and in my own work and be able to defend it in a way that, again, is diplomatic versus more emotional. And so yes, I would say the CBD company, sure, I've made every mistake in the book. I sent out a 420 text on an SMS platform and got banned. Like, you make so many mistakes.
Wait, what? How does that even happen? Like, wait, what happened?
So there's a lot of compliance in and around CBD and obviously cannabis. There's a lot of marketing guidelines that you have to follow legally. And basically, the regulations per state and things of that nature make it really tricky for any CBD, let alone cannabis company, to market themselves. It's really hard. So one of the things that I did very early on, right after we hadn't even launched Get Supr, but we were building out our SMS platform and our email marketing platforms, and it was 420. So I naturally sent out a 420 text to, I think, our 5 people on our SMS list. And we got flagged and I think banned for a little bit. We're back up and running now. I can't remember what exactly happened, but it was one of those things where we couldn't use the words 4-20 in SMS. And I didn't know that.
Right.
I don't know if anyone else knows that, but it's a thing. So there's a lot of mistakes in business and a lot of things too that, we have these gut reactions, we have these great ideas, and we're going to make mistakes. That's the human being inside of us. And I think that's also the blessing and the curse of being an entrepreneur. We have, the being naive to jump into a business that we know nothing about and to, build wings and fly as we're falling off the cliff. Like, those are just things that we learn how to do. And it's part of this human process.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of so my brother was launching this handgun class. And so we built the online course. And at the time, we don't run Facebook ads anymore, but we used to for some clients before they made it way too difficult. And so, but exactly what you're saying, it's like, I don't go and read that shit. And I don't read all the little fine print things. And, and I didn't think we were doing anything wrong. And we weren't promoting anything bad at all. But there was this one picture and it was like a target with a bullseye and it had a gun. And, to me, it was like a picture that was like promoting the class and get on target. And it was about safety. And every state and every country is different. But in the state that we live in, they were passing a new law about carrying concealed weapons, which means you don't have to have a permit and you can carry a gun and basically put it up under your shirt and people don't have to know that it's there, or wear it up under your jeans. And where previously Tennessee had a law that if you had to have a concealed carry weapon permit, and my dad was an undercover cop, and that's our brother. So I grew up with all these laws and all these things. But when it came to marketing the class and again, teaching people about safety, I never thought that we would get flagged. And so the exact thing happened. Okay. So they completely banned his account. And it was crazy. So it's I had to go through all that and learn all this stuff. And then the same thing, when PP, protective gear or something, we were doing something for another client. It was literally about mask. And Facebook had put out, they literally changed the rules daily when all the pandemic stuff was going on.
Oh, I bet.
We got flagged and we got banned for something again. And it's just we're out there just literally trying to help people and give Facebook our money to run ads to get to people. And they've made it so difficult. But again, instead of just saying like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll just, people are like, well, can't you just throw up an ad? I'm like, it is not that
It's
effing
not.
easy.
I
It's
wish it was. You probably used to be, but not anymore.
no. And I'm sure it's because of, lawsuits and various things, but it's like you get your hands slapped real quick. I don't mind getting my hands. I'd rather know quickly that I need to like look into something more before I
Yeah.
like just, dig it a little bit deeper. But I will say, we appealed everything and we changed the picture, so it all
Yeah.
turns out okay. But
It all works out, all buffs out.
yeah, are you guys able to ship like all over the states? Are you able to ship out of country, or are there certain rules around that?
Yes, there's a lot of compliance basically across state lines, but being that we are CBD, we are allowed to ship pretty much to any state. We can't ship out of the country per their country's regulations. So, in
Okay.
fact, this was another one. One time we tried to ship to Canada because we didn't know anything about it, and we got a call from from customs being like, no, like we're not sure what you guys are doing here. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you learn as you go. And the same thing with the CBD space, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. It's a lot of things changing. There's a lot of legislation. I mean, we were up in a really awesome cannabis, we were up at a really awesome cannabis conference in New York, and I had just learned that I believe it was Massachusetts only, they have a really unique law where they kind of promote the cannabis brands that are in and around the state, and they're not necessarily open to other brands outside of the state. And it was really interesting just hearing each of these people that were coming to this conference in New York and all of the different regulations that they have to go through per their state. So it's an interesting industry. And obviously I 100% being from California, I took a lot of that for granted. Because obviously THC is legal here and so is CBD, and learning that and seeing that side, especially when we go to other states, it's almost a little bit humbling. Like I'm very grateful for the business, and I'm very grateful for obviously being in California, and I had the freedom to create Get Supr without having to, you know, be under this like highly monitored system or these different regulations or laws or things of that nature. So
It's so interesting because, and I don't know if you've like heard this side of things, but I'm in this entrepreneur organization, and they're recently, I would say, like when the pandemic started, lots and lots of emails and lots of talks going back and forth about employees and team members and people that are employed, like that are drinking CBD and taking, eating food and gummies. And
Mhm.
they wanted to create like a work policy around it of like, you
Mhm.
can and can't do these things. And like, I mean, it
Huh.
just went deeper and deeper and deeper into like laws and HIPAA and healthcare. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I'm over here and I'm like, I don't really give my opinion unless they say don't give your opinion unless you have like an experience share kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I was just kind
Totally.
of keeping quiet, reading the forums and stuff. And so someone asked me in the events industry, what I thought. And I'm like, honestly, I don't get into people's healthcare business. It's like,
Yeah.
if that's something that helps you chill out or whatever, as long as you're getting the work done and you're not like making mistakes over and over, I don't give a shit.
Mhm.
But also it's like, my sister has ALS, and so something that has really helped her is CBD and is cannabis stuff. And it's like even some of the things that have helped her technically aren't legal, where we
Sure.
live, but from a
Sure.
medical perspective, you
Mhm.
you can get your hands on it. And the system in Tennessee, it makes it really difficult. It makes it really
Yeah,
hard.
I bet.
They make you almost feel like you're a criminal, like you're doing something bad. But I also watch that, her hands just will shake because with ALS, you lose function of literally everything, your muscles, your
Oh,
tendons, everything. And
yeah.
so it's like if there's something, her brain works just fine, just fine. But it's
Sure.
like the calming effect, in the hemp and stuff, the way that it helps, and it really, she can't sleep,
Yeah.
you even
Oh,
mentioned it. It's like, I mean, as an entrepreneur, it's like, how do you turn it off? I would much
sure.
rather take something that's all natural than be,
Sure.
and I'm with you, than be on a pharmaceutical drug. That's a whole different podcast
I
of,
know.
of like the addiction and the drugs and the money and the industry
Yeah.
and how it's killing people. It's a whole different
Hmm.
story. But it's like, it's not a bad thing. And so I don't
Hmm.
understand like why some states make people feel that way. And
Yeah.
then for employers to be, the owners to come and say, well, I'm going to go test these things. And it's like, is it really a
Mm.
problem? Like, have you seen any problems like come out of it where people are drinking this coffee and it's doing more harm than good? Like, I haven't seen it. Maybe I'm just oblivious, but have you had any companies or brands like come to you and ask you this, like as a business owner, like what your thoughts are?
Yeah, we get tons and tons and tons of consumers that have government jobs that ask if they can take Get Supr. We basically are in the process and we continue to try to drug test Get Supr all the time. But our short answer is no. Do not drink it. Do not jeopardize your job because we don't know how it's going to show up. The reason why is because so essentially the amount of THC in your body is what we would call negligible. We cannot control how much Get Supr they can put into their body at one time. So, it will show up differently. And I also don't know what else is going into their system. So the long and the short is no. That being said, going back to, the war on drugs and marijuana being categorized as this gateway drug, you know, I feel like there's a lot of people that have suffered through incarceration and have suffered through a lot of political, lack of better word, bullshit for
Yep.
what this plant is really capable of. And,
Yep.
for example, I love that you talked about your sister because that pulls on my heartstrings. And, one of the things that I've been experimenting with now is CBG and CBN.
Ooh, what's
And
that?
they are both variations of, and I'm still trying to wrap my brain around a lot of this. I have an awesome extractor that could tell you everything about them. But essentially they are just different strains of CBD and of the cannabis plant itself that can help you. And one of them is actually I'll plug this product because it's been one of the best products that I've ever tried in my entire life. It's called by a brand called So Eden, SOWEDEN. So it's a CBD and CBN tincture, and it's for sleep. It's actually So Eden sleep tincture, and it has helped me so much. The first time I ever took it was on a red eye flight from San Diego to Miami, and I fell asleep instantly and I was sitting coach. It was a booked flight, like I full on mask, like crowded, and it helped me sleep. And I actually bought some recently and it's really been helping with my sleep. And so I feel like when we go to talk about, and again, like when we go to talk about cannabis and we go to talk about the plant, I feel like I know one hundredth of the amount of power and, science and education within the plant that is so beneficial. And I feel like we aren't doing it any justice by, constantly living, letting the stigma live on of it being, the stoner, the gateway drug, all these different things. And because I feel like truly, like we have seen cases where it's really helped people, it's really impacted them, it's really changed their lives. And, whether or not it is this legal or illegal substance, I feel like there should be, a call to action on either recategorizing it or in reinvestigating why it was, illegal in the first place. And I think again, like, we talk about people being incarcerated, we talk about all these different things where it's like, well, now it's legal. So like, what are we going to do about all these people that were kind of wronged in the very beginning? Or, even, in our day-to-day lives that are shamed for, taking these products that are helping them and bettering their lives. I think that stereotype for sure needs to die off. And I think it's also something too that we can better by educating, others and helping spread awareness on the plant itself.
And you couldn't have said it any better. Like, it is all education and like reframing. And it's like, you're not a bad person if CBD helps you with something. And
Sure.
I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have way too much background in like pharmaceuticals and like healthcare. And I just have to keep my mouth shut sometimes, because I just will like go off on someone who's like, they're standing there with like all their pill bottles, from Walgreens or CVS. And then, you have an all natural product, and like, it's like, you can't even have a conversation or argue with them, because they don't know what they don't know. And it really does come down to education.
Well,
Like 100%.
yeah. And it's funny. It's my grandpa has had so many health issues, so many medical issues. And, that's something too, where my dad and my grandfather have been told that, big pharma is the answer. And, listening to your doctor and taking what he prescribes you is the most trusted way. And I feel like now, I don't know, I feel like the opioid crisis, from what I've seen, really opened my eyes up to, big medicine and things of that nature. But I also feel like there is that lack of education, because maybe that's what, again, they've been brought up to believe. And so, if you're brought up to believe, you trust your doctors, you trust these big names, weed is illegal, weed is for the stoners. It's, the gateway drug to things that are, insane drugs that ruin people's life. Of course you have that idea of CBD. Of course you don't want to take cannabis or be associated with it. Absolutely. I would totally believe that too. Now, granted, I grew up in a different world. I grew up in the world where, cannabis started making this return and forefront. And, thanks to things like social media and the internet, we've been able to explore and have more access to information than ever. But going back to my grandpa, I think him and my dad both were absolutely shocked that I wanted to start, I wanted to have a product that had CBD in it. They both take it. They both love it. And, my grandpa is definitely one of those guys that he's had so many medical issues where it's like, yeah, he has 27 different pain meds for every day of the week. And it breaks our heart. And there's times where he gets through it and like moves through it. And there's other times where, it hurts, and we have to kind of just support him in what his decisions are. And so I think, this conversation is something that I feel like we're going to start seeing a lot more of. And I hope we do. And I hope that, the CBD brands that are out there continue to do the good work and continue to reach people through education and through awareness, because I think it also is changing lives.
It is. And it's helping lives, and it's saving lives. Like I see it firsthand, but until you have a personal experience, you don't know what you don't know. So this was so helpful. If people want to connect with you, what is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah. And I also want to like preface this too. I love Get Supr, but I am still learning every day. So if there is something I said completely inaccurate, I am down to do a correction corner here. I'm going to just put that all on the table. I am still learning about this plant and this industry every single day. Just want to just throw that out there, because I know there's a lot of controversy around CBD and around cannabis. So just want to throw that disclaimer out. But you guys can follow my personal journey just at Whitney Eckis. My last name is spelled Eckis. You can follow our agency at Eckis Marketing, and you can check out Get Supr, which is our hemp infused instant coffee, at Get Supr, and Supr is spelled SUPR.
I love it. And we'll put all the links in the show notes. So if you're driving or multitasking, don't worry. You can always refer back to the show notes, and we've got some little goodies and things in there. And thank you so much for your time. Like, this was so helpful.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And if you're watching or listening, thank you so much for your time, and be sure to tune in next week to another episode of Business Unveiled. Bye, y'all.
That's it for this week's episode of Business Unveiled. Now that you have all the tools that you need to conquer the world and GSD, get shit done, would you share this with your friends and fellow business leaders? One thing that would really, really help us and help new listeners is for you to rate the show and leave a comment in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in and listen to Business Unveiled. You can check out the show notes at angelaprofit.com/podcast and link up with us on social media so you can share your biggest insights. And I want to know your aha moments. Until next week, remember, the profitable shifts and structures you're creating in your business help you be more present in your life. So get out there and GSD.